The scream died in her throat as Vivian's trembling hands lost their grip. 12 drawings scattered across the marble floor, like fragile pieces of hope slipping away. Before her stood Benedict Hale, the tech billionaire, known for his ice-cold demeanor stepping out of the glass elevator. His eyes dropped to the drawing's portraits of a woman lying in a hospital bed, medical bills folded between them, amounts circled in red ink. Vivian crouched down, gathering each sheet with shaking fingers, shame burning through her chest. I was just trying to raise money for my mom's medicine. Her voice barely made it past a whisper. The billionaire tilted his head. A child, selling drawings, to save a life. The entire lobby held its breath. But no one knew that in just a few hours this man would do something that would bring the entire building to tears. But before we continue, comment below and let us know where you're watching this from. We'd love to know how far our story has traveled, and don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's begin. Marissa Cole had cleaned floors in Hale Tower for 12 years. She knew every corner of the 60-story glass giant, every executive's coffee preference, every hidden stain on the marble that no one else noticed. She had raised Vivian alone in a studio apartment 3 blocks away, working double shifts so her daughter could have books, art supplies from thrift stores, and a chance at something better. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed. The stroke hit without warning. One moment Marissa was wiping down a conference table on the 42nd floor. The next, she was on the ground, her right side numb, her vision blurring into shapes she couldn't recognize. The hospital bills came fast. $12,000 for the emergency room, $8,000 for the MRI, another $6,000 for the medications that kept the seizures at bay. Vivian was 16. She had no family, no savings, no plan, just a folder of drawings she'd been working on for months, taught by library books and YouTube tutorials she watched on a cracked phone screen. So she made a decision. Every morning before school, she'd stop by the employee break room in Hale Tower, laying out her drawings on the corner table. Portraits of skylines, flowers in pencil, faces she'd sketched from memory. She laminated some of them with cheap plastic sheets from the dollar store, hoping they'd look more professional, more worth the $10 or $15 she was asking. Most employees walked past without looking. A few smiled politely, but kept moving. One older woman bought a portrait of a cat for $5, then squeezed Vivian's hand and whispered, "Keep going, sweetheart." It wasn't enough. Not even close. This morning Vivian came prepared. She had 12 new drawings, her best work yet. Portraits of her mother's hands folded in prayer. A close-up of her mother's eyes filled with a quiet strength Vivian was terrified of losing. She needed $60 by noon. That was the cost of the anti-seizure medication the hospital refused to administer without upfront payment. She was standing near the main lobby trying to stay invisible when a sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" A facilities manager in a crisp suit marched toward her, his face twisted in irritation. "Children are not allowed to sell merchandise on company property. Do you understand that?" Vivian's heart hammered. "I'm sorry, I don't care what your excuse is. Pack it up. Now." She bent down quickly, hands shaking as she tried to gather the drawings. But her fingers were clumsy with panic, and the folder slipped. That's when the papers exploded across the floor, and that's when the elevator doors opened. Benedict Hale stepped into the lobby, flanked by 2 assistants in dark blazers. His presence was immediate, the kind that made conversations stop mid-sentence. He paused. His eyes moved to the scattered drawings at his feet. He crouched down, slowly picking up one of the portraits. It was the drawing of a woman's eyes. Marissa's eyes, rendered in soft graphite with a tenderness that didn't belong in a corporate tower. For a moment something shifted in his expression. Just a flicker. Then it was gone. The facilities manager turned pale. "Mr. Hale, I'm so sorry. I was just handling a—" Benedict raised a hand, silencing him. His gaze stayed on Vivian. "What's your name?" "Vivian, sir." Her voice was barely audible. "And these drawings?" She swallowed hard. "I'm trying to buy medicine for my mom. She's in the hospital. If I don't get the money today, the doctors won't give her the next dose." Benedict's jaw tightened. He glanced at the hospital invoice clipped between 2 of the drawings. The name of the facility caught his attention: St. Michael's Medical Center. The same place his mother had been treated years ago when they had nothing. He stood holding the drawing carefully. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Leave all of these here. I'll review them this afternoon." The facilities manager's mouth fell open. Vivian looked up, confused, desperate. "Sir, I don't understand." "You will." He handed the drawing to his assistant. "Make sure these are brought to my office. Untouched." Then he turned back to Vivian, his expression unreadable. "Be here at 4 o'clock. Alone." He walked toward the elevator without another word. Vivian stood frozen, clutching the empty folder to her chest. She didn't dare hope. She didn't dare believe. But as the elevator doors closed, Benedict Hale gave one final instruction to his assistant, quiet but firm. "Find out everything about that girl, and her mother." The 58th floor of Hale Tower was silent, except for the hum of the city below. Benedict stood at his desk, the 12 drawings spread out under the cold white light of his architect lamp. He studied each one slowly, methodically, the way he analyzed data, the way he dissected million-dollar contracts. But this was different. These weren't just drawings. They were windows. The first few were exactly what he expected: portraits of Marissa. Her hands clasped together, her profile against a hospital pillow. Her eyes tired but unbroken, staring at something beyond the frame. Vivian had drawn her mother from memory. Every line trembled slightly, the mark of a hand that worked fast, afraid of forgetting. But then Benedict reached the 7th drawing. He stopped. His breath caught in his throat. It was a portrait of a younger man standing beside a hospital bed. The man's face was partially turned away, but his posture was unmistakable. Shoulders tight, head bowed, one hand resting on the bed rail. Beside him, a woman with bandages over her eyes. Benedict's fingers tightened on the edge of the paper. This was him, 23 years ago, standing beside his mother in the charity ward of St. Michael's. But how this image had never been published. There were no photos, no records. He'd buried that part of his life so deep that even his closest colleagues didn't know it existed. His assistant Caroline stepped closer, her voice cautious. "Sir." "How would she know?" Benedict didn't answer. He couldn't. He sat down slowly, still holding the drawing. His mind dragged him backward into a past he'd spent 2 decades trying to outrun. He was 8 years old when his father left. No goodbye, no explanation. Just an empty closet and a note that said, "I can't do this anymore." His mother, Elena, worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, folding laundry at a hospital during the day, and selling homemade empanadas on weekends. She never complained, not once. But the stress broke her body before it broke her spirit. By the time Benedict turned 14, her vision started failing. The doctors called it stress-induced optic neuropathy. Temporary, they said. But temporary meant months, maybe a year. She couldn't work, couldn't see, couldn't do anything but sit in their one-room apartment and listen to the world go by. So Benedict read to her, every night, for 2 hours. He read newspapers, novels from the library, even the backs of cereal boxes, anything to fill the silence, anything to keep her from feeling invisible. And when she cried, when the weight of it all crushed her, he held her hand and told her the same thing every time. "You're not alone, Mama. I see you." Benedict blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. Caroline spoke softly. "Should I contact the girl?" "Not yet." He turned back to the drawings. There was one more that made his chest tighten, a portrait of his mother's hands resting on a wooden table, fingers interlaced in prayer. Vivian hadn't just guessed. She'd seen something. A fragment of a memory left behind in hospital records, maybe a discarded photograph in an old file. Or maybe she'd simply drawn what she understood: the quiet desperation of a child watching a parent disappear. At St. Michael's Medical Center, Marissa lay in bed, her body weak but her mind sharp. Vivian sat beside her, holding her mother's hand, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did you sell any?" Marissa's voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp. Vivian forced a smile. "A couple. Enough for now." It was a lie. Her pockets were empty. Her folder was gone. And she had no idea what would happen at 4 o'clock. Marissa squeezed her daughter's hand. "You're so strong, baby. Stronger than I ever was." "Don't say that, Mama." "It's true." Marissa's eyes glistened. You fight for people, even when they don't deserve it. Vivian looked away, blinking hard. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not now. By 3:30, the rain was coming down in sheets. Vivian stood outside Hale Tower, soaked through, clutching a new stack of drawings she'd finished the night before. She had no idea what Benedict Hale wanted. But she knew one thing: if there was even the smallest chance he could help, she had to take it. Inside the lobby, a small group of young employees huddled near the coffee station, whispering and laughing. One of them noticed Vivian. "Oh, look. The little artist is back," another smirked. "You really think you can sell drawings and save your mom? What is this, a movie?" Vivian's face flushed red, but she didn't respond. She laid her drawings out on a corner bench, hands trembling. "Hey, maybe she'll draw us next. We could use a good laugh." The words stung, but Vivian kept her head down. And then, "Is that supposed to be me?" The voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Benedict Hale stood behind them, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The employees turned white. He stepped forward and picked up one of the drawings, a rough portrait sketch Vivian had been practicing. It was him, standing alone in a hallway, looking out a window. Vivian stammered. I was just practicing, sir. I didn't mean—" Benedict's eyes stayed on the drawing. "No, you weren't practicing." He looked up at her, and for the first time his voice softened. "You were surviving." The lobby went silent. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. He placed it in Vivian's hands. "Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, 58th floor. Come alone." Then he turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving Vivian standing there, holding the envelope like it might disappear if she moved. Inside, there was no money, just a handwritten note. "Bring your mother's medical files. All of them." The 58th floor felt like another world. Thick carpet muffled every footstep. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Vivian stood in the center of Benedict's office, clutching a worn manila folder against her chest. Inside were her mother's medical records pages and pages of diagnoses, treatment plans, and bills highlighted in yellow. Benedict sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, watching her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. Then he asked a question that made no sense. "Do you know my mother was blind?" Vivian blinked. "Sir, temporarily blind," he clarified, his voice low and even. "For 14 months. I was 14 years old." She shook her head slowly, unsure where this was going. Benedict stood and walked to the window, his back to her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, he began. "My father left when I was 8. No warning. No explanation. Just gone. My mother worked herself to the bone trying to keep us afloat. 3 jobs, sometimes 4. She cleaned buildings at night, folded hospital linens during the day, sold food on the weekends." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The stress destroyed her optic nerve. One day she woke up and couldn't see. The doctors said it might come back. Might not. We couldn't afford the treatment that would have helped faster, so we waited. And waited." Vivian stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. "Every night," Benedict continued, "I read to her. 2 hours, sometimes 3. Newspapers, novels, anything I could find. Because she was terrified of becoming invisible, of being forgotten." He turned back to face Vivian, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. "Your drawings. They reminded me of her. The way you see people. The way you remember them." He crossed the room and picked up one of the drawings from his desk, the one Vivian had made of him and his mother in the hospital. "This," he said, holding it up. "How did you know?" Vivian's voice came out small. I found an old photo. It fell out of a file in the hospital archive room when I was looking for my mom's paperwork. It was labeled with your mother's name." "I didn't mean to—" "You didn't steal it," Benedict interrupted. "You saw it, and you understood what it meant." He set the drawing down gently, almost reverently. "That's a gift, Vivian. A rare one." Before she could respond, the door opened. Caroline, Benedict's assistant, stepped in, her face pale and tense. "Sir, we have a problem." Benedict's expression hardened instantly. "What is it?" Caroline hesitated, glancing at Vivian. It's about Marissa Cole's insurance file. Go on. Someone submitted a request 3 days ago to remove her from the company's supplemental health assistance program. It was approved this morning. If it goes through, the hospital will stop her treatment by the end of the week. The air in the room turned ice cold. Benedict's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Who signed the authorization? Caroline handed him a tablet. He scanned the document, his eyes narrowing. The signature belonged to the facilities manager, the same one who'd tried to throw Vivian out of the lobby. But there were 2 other names listed as co-signers, members of the Employee Oversight Committee. The same people who had mocked Vivian in the lobby just yesterday. Benedict's fingers tightened around the tablet. Vivian's voice broke through the silence, shaking. Please, don't fire them. They didn't know. They were just what? Benedict's tone was sharp, but not directed at her. Just cruel, just careless with someone's life. They didn't mean to hurt anyone, Vivian said, tears streaming down her face now. Please, sir. My mom always told me. Holding on to anger only makes you smaller. Benedict stared at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly and set the tablet down. You're too kind for this world, Vivian. But I don't tolerate people who abuse power over those who can't fight back. He turned to Caroline. Revoke the authorization. Immediately. And open an internal review on how this was allowed to happen in the first place. Yes, sir. Benedict walked back to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a file, Marissa's complete medical record. He flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with every line. The hospital is preparing to discharge her, he said quietly. Not because she's recovered, because the bills haven't been paid. Vivian's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of a chair to steady herself. How much time does she have? 48 hours. Maybe less. The words hit like a punch to the chest. Vivian couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Her vision blurred, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she broke. She collapsed into the chair, sobbing into her hands, her whole body shaking with the weight of it all. Benedict watched her for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. St. Michael's Medical Center Billing Department. This is Benedict Hale. Patient name Marissa Cole. Account number is in your system. There was a pause on the other end. Yes, Mr. Hale. How can I assist you? I'm authorizing full payment of her outstanding balance, effective immediately, and I want her moved to a private recovery room with round-the-clock care. Another pause. Longer this time. Sir, the total balance is $43,600. Are you? I'm aware of the amount. Charge it to my corporate account, and if she needs surgery, physical therapy, or any additional treatment, you bill me directly. No questions, no delays. Understood, Mr. Hale. We'll process this right away. He hung up. Vivian looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, her voice barely a whisper. Why? Why would you do this? Benedict crouched down in front of her, meeting her eyes. Because someone did it for me once, and I swore that if I ever had the power to help someone the way I was helped, I wouldn't hesitate. He stood, his voice firm, but gentle. You don't owe me anything, Vivian. The world owes you. For fighting when no one else would. For seeing people when everyone else looked away. Vivian tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She just sat there, trembling, overwhelmed by a relief so powerful it felt like drowning and breathing at the same time. Benedict returned to his desk and pulled out one more drawing, the one Vivian had made of his mother's hands. There's one more thing I need from you, he said quietly. Vivian wiped her eyes. Anything. I want you to paint something for me. A portrait. The last thing my mother wanted to see before she passed away. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. She wanted to see me and her together. The way we were before everything fell apart. Vivian nodded, her heart still racing. I'll do my best. I know you will. He walked her to the door. Before she left, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Go see your mother. Tell her she's safe now. Vivian stepped into the hallway, the envelope with the paid invoice clutched tightly in her hands. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Vivian sat beside her mother's hospital bed, a sketch pad balanced on her knees, her pencil moving in slow, deliberate strokes. Marissa was asleep, her breathing steady now, her face no longer twisted in pain. The new medication was working. The private room was quiet, clean, filled with light from a window that overlooked the city. It felt like a dream. But Vivian didn't let herself rest. She had work to do. On the page in front of her, two women began to take shape. One was her mother Marissa, sitting upright in a simple wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes soft but strong. The kind of strength that comes from surviving what should have broken you. The other was Elena Hale. Vivian had only seen one photograph of her, but it was enough. She drew Elena beside Marissa, standing with one hand resting gently on Marissa's shoulder. Two women who had never met, but who had lived the same story. Two mothers who had given everything so their children could have more. Vivian worked late into the night, her hand cramping, her eyes burning. But she didn't stop. Because this wasn't just a drawing. It was a promise. Marissa stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She turned her head slowly and saw her daughter hunched over the sketch pad, her face lit by the glow of the bedside lamp. "Baby, what are you doing?" Vivian looked up, smiling through her exhaustion. "I'm finishing something. For someone who helped us." Marissa's voice was weak but full of warmth. "You draw so beautifully, Viv. You know that." Vivian's throat tightened. "I'm just trying to remember. So I don't forget what matters." Marissa reached out, and Vivian took her hand. "You're stronger than I ever was," Marissa whispered. "No, Mama. I'm only strong because you taught me how." Marissa smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. A real artist is someone who sees into people's hearts. Vivian squeezed her mother's hand and turned back to the drawing. She had one more detail to add. In the background between the two women, she sketched a young boy and a young girl, Benedict and herself, standing side by side looking forward. Not at the past, at what came next. 3 days later, Vivian stood outside Benedict's office, the finished drawing carefully rolled in a protective tube. Her hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, from hope. Caroline opened the door and gave her a small, reassuring nod. "He's ready for you." Vivian stepped inside. Benedict was standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He didn't turn around immediately. "Set it on the desk," he said quietly. Vivian placed the tube down and carefully unrolled the drawing, smoothing the edges with trembling fingers. Then she stepped back. Benedict turned. He walked slowly to the desk, his eyes falling on the portrait. And he stopped. For a full minute he said nothing. He just stood there staring at the two women, his mother and Marissa, side by side. His jaw tightened. His breathing grew uneven. Caroline, standing near the door, brought a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "It's..." Her voice broke. "It's perfect." Benedict reached out and touched the edge of the paper, his fingers hovering just above his mother's face. "She looks exactly how I remember her." His voice was thick, barely holding together. Vivian's own eyes blurred with tears. "I wanted them to be together. Because they lived the same life. They fought the same fight." Benedict finally looked up at her, and this time he didn't hide the emotion in his eyes. "This is the only gift anyone has ever given me that made me feel whole again." He carefully picked up the drawing and walked toward the far side of his office. Vivian followed, unsure what was happening. Benedict opened a set of double doors she hadn't noticed before. Inside was a private gallery. Soft lighting illuminated framed artwork on every wall, original pieces by masters, rare prints, sculptures on pedestals. But at the center of the room, on the main wall, was a single portrait of Elena Hale, painted years ago by a famous artist Benedict had commissioned. He stood in front of it, holding Vivian's drawing. Then, without a word, he removed his mother's portrait from the wall and placed Vivian's drawing in its spot, at eye level, in the place of honor. Vivian gasped. "Sir, you can't." "I can," Benedict said firmly. "Because this is the one that matters. This is the one that reminds me why I do what I do." He turned to face her, his expression resolute. "Vivian, I have a question for you." She nodded, still in shock. "Do you want to study art seriously? At a real school? With real teachers?" Her breath caught. I don't know if we could afford. That's not what I asked. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but unyielding. Do you want to? Because if you do, I'll handle everything. Tuition, supplies, housing. Whatever you need. You'll never have to worry about money again. You'll only have to worry about becoming the artist you were meant to be. Vivian's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face, sobs shaking her entire body. Not from sadness. From relief. From disbelief. From a weight she'd been carrying for so long finally lifting. Benedict knelt beside her, his voice steady. You saved my mother's memory, Vivian. You gave her back to me. Let me give you your future. Vivian looked up at him through her tears, her voice breaking. I don't know how to thank you. You already have. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it. And as she rose to her feet, she looked back at the drawing on the wall, 2 mothers, 2 children standing together. A reminder that no one fights alone, and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. As Vivian left the office that day, clutching an envelope with scholarship papers and a letter of recommendation written in Benedict's own hand, she realized something. She hadn't just sold a drawing. She'd drawn a door, and someone had finally opened it. 2 weeks later, the lobby of Hale Tower looked nothing like it had before. White panels lined the walls, soft classical music played through hidden speakers. Spotlights illuminated 12 drawings, each one mounted and framed in sleek black wood. A banner hung above the entrance. Eyes That Never Gave Up, a collection by Vivian Cole. Vivian stood in the center of the room, wearing a simple black dress her mother had helped her pick out from a thrift store. Her hands were folded in front of her, no longer shaking. Around her, the room filled with people. Employees, executives, investors, art collectors, journalists with cameras and notepads. And standing near the back, watching quietly, was Benedict Hale. A woman in a tailored suit approached one of the drawings, a portrait of Marissa's hands folded in prayer. She leaned in close, studying every line. Excuse me, she said, turning to Vivian. Where did you study? Vivian swallowed. I didn't. I learned from library books, and from watching my mom work. The woman blinked, surprised. You're self-taught. Yes, ma'am. Remarkable. The woman extended her hand. I'm a curator for the Modern Youth Arts Foundation. We'd love to feature your work in our Emerging Artists series. Vivian shook her hand, still unable to believe this was real. Across the room, a small group gathered near the drawing of the 2 mothers, Marissa and Elena, side by side. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Is that his mother? I heard he never talks about her. This girl must be someone special. Near the coffee station, the facilities manager and the 2 employees who had mocked Vivian stood together, their faces pale and tight. One of them, a young man in his 20s, stepped forward. His voice was quiet, ashamed. Vivian, I owe you an apology. She turned to him, unsure what to say. I was cruel to you, he continued. I didn't know your story. I didn't care. And I'm sorry. The other employee, a woman with short-cropped hair, nodded. We were wrong. Completely wrong. You didn't deserve that. Vivian looked at them for a long moment. Then softly she said, Thank you for saying that. The man's eyes welled up. You could have gotten us fired. Mr. Hale wanted to. But you stopped him. Because my mom taught me that holding on to anger only makes you smaller, Vivian replied. And I want to be bigger than that. The 2 employees nodded, unable to speak, and quietly stepped back into the crowd. At exactly 7 o'clock, the room quieted. Benedict Hale stepped forward, standing beneath the banner. All eyes turned to him. He didn't use notes. He didn't need to. I've built a career on speed. He began, his voice calm but resonant. On moving fast, staying ahead, never looking back. I thought that's what success meant. Momentum, progress, growth. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. But 2 weeks ago, a 16-year-old girl reminded me of something I'd forgotten. He gestured toward Vivian. She reminded me that success isn't just about how far you go. It's about knowing when to stop, when to turn around, when to see the person right in front of you who's been invisible all along. The room was silent. These drawings, Benedict continued, aren't just art. They're acts of love, acts of survival. They're proof that even when the world tells you you're too small, too young, too powerless, you can still change everything. He looked directly at Vivian now, his voice softer. This young woman saved her mother's life, and she reminded me why mine mattered. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. Several people wiped their eyes. Benedict straightened his voice, growing stronger. That's why tonight I'm announcing the creation of the Marissa Cole Arts Foundation, a fund dedicated to providing full scholarships, mentorship, and resources to young artists from underserved communities. Gasps echoed through the room. Vivian's hands flew to her mouth. We'll start with 10 students this year, Benedict said, and we'll grow from there, because talent doesn't care about your bank account, and neither should opportunity. The room erupted into applause. Vivian turned away, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by a gratitude so powerful it felt like it might lift her off the ground. As the evening continued, a tall man in a gray blazer approached the portrait of Marissa's eyes, the very first drawing Benedict had picked up off the floor. He studied it for a long time. Then he turned to Caroline, who was managing the event. I'd like to purchase this piece. Caroline checked her tablet. It's listed at $15,000. The man didn't hesitate. I'll offer $30,000. Caroline's eyes widened. Sir, are you sure? Absolutely. This kind of heart doesn't come along often. She nodded and made the note. A few minutes later, Caroline found Vivian standing near the window, staring out at the city lights. Vivian, Caroline said gently, someone just bought your portrait of your mother for $30,000. Vivian turned her face blank with shock. What? He said, Caroline smiled. He said heart like this is priceless, but he wanted to try anyway. Vivian looked across the room at Benedict, who was watching her with a small, knowing smile. He raised his glass slightly. She raised hers back, tears streaming freely now. This wasn't just an art show. It was the beginning of everything. The gallery at the New England Academy of Fine Arts was packed wall to wall with students, parents, and critics. Cameras flashed. Conversations hummed. The air smelled like fresh paint and possibility. And in the center of it all stood Vivian Cole, now 17, standing beside a collection titled Invisible Hands. 12 portraits, 12 stories. Each one a tribute to people the world had overlooked: janitors, nurses, delivery drivers, caregivers. People whose work kept the world turning, but whose faces no one remembered. A reporter from Art Voice magazine leaned in with a recorder. Your work has been described as empathy made visible. How does that feel? Vivian smiled softly. I just paint what I see. And I see people who deserve to be seen. The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. You've been called the voice of a generation, a young artist who sees beyond the surface. I'm not special, Vivian said quietly. I just remember where I came from. Across the room, Marissa stood with her arm linked through that of an older woman, Mrs. Chen, her supervisor in the facilities department at Hale Tower. Marissa had recovered fully, her speech clear, her strength restored. She now worked in logistics coordination, a lighter role that allowed her to stay close to her daughter's life. She watched Vivian with pride so fierce it made her chest ache. That's my girl, she whispered. Mrs. Chen squeezed her arm. You raised a miracle, Marissa. No, Marissa said, her voice thick. She raised herself. I just held the flashlight. Near the back of the gallery, partially hidden behind a pillar, Benedict Hale stood with his hands in his pockets. He didn't announce himself, didn't need the attention. He was here for one reason only: to see what Vivian had become. And what he saw took his breath away. She moved through the crowd with grace now, no longer the trembling girl who had dropped her drawings on a marble floor. She was confident, grounded, unshaken. But she still had that light in her eyes, the one that saw people really saw them in a way most never would. A young journalist approached him. Excuse me, aren't you Benedict Hale? He nodded. There's a rumor you discovered her. Is that true? Benedict's gaze stayed on Vivian. No. She discovered herself. I just got out of the way. The journalist pressed further. But you funded the scholarship that brought her here, didn't you? Benedict finally looked at him, his voice quiet, but firm. A lot of people fund a lot of things. What matters is what someone does with the opportunity. He turned and walked toward the exit. But before he left, Vivian caught his eye. She smiled. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that needed no words. And then he was gone. Later that evening, during her acceptance speech for the National Youth Arts Fellowship, Vivian stood at the podium, her hands steady on the microphone. "A year ago I was selling drawings in a lobby hoping someone would see me," she said. "I didn't know if my mom would survive. I didn't know if I'd make it through the week." Her voice softened. But someone stopped. Someone looked. And that changed everything. She paused, scanning the crowd. "I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because someone believed that people like me, people like my mom, deserve a chance. And now, I want to spend the rest of my life giving that chance to someone else." The room erupted in applause. And somewhere in the back row, Benedict Hale, who had quietly slipped back in, closed his eyes and allowed himself just for a moment to feel proud. Not of what he'd done, but of what she'd become. The apartment was small, but it was theirs. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, warming the wooden table where Vivian sat with her sketch pad. She was working on a new series, Portraits of Hope, faces of people who had survived the unthinkable and still chose to smile. Marissa stood at the stove, brewing tea, humming softly to herself. Her movements were slower now, more careful, but there was peace in them. The kind of peace that only comes after a storm has finally passed. "Mom," Vivian said without looking up, "if Mr. Hale hadn't stopped that day, do you think we'd still be here?" Marissa turned, carrying 2 mugs to the table. She set one down in front of her daughter and sat across from her. "Baby, Mr. Hale didn't save us." Vivian looked up, confused. Marissa reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "You saved us. With your heart. With your hands. With your refusal to give up even when the whole world said you should." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "He just opened the door," Marissa continued, her voice steady and sure. "But you're the one who walked through it. And you're the one who's holding it open for everyone else now." Vivian squeezed her mother's hand, unable to speak. Outside, the city hummed with life. Cars honked. People laughed. The world kept turning. But in that small apartment, with sunlight streaming through the window and 2 mugs of tea cooling on the table, there was only gratitude, and the quiet knowledge that love, real, stubborn, unshakable love, could move mountains. Even when the mountain was made of marble floors and glass towers and people who refused to see. Vivian picked up her pencil and returned to her sketch. She was drawing eyes again. The eyes of people who never gave up. And this time she wasn't afraid they'd be forgotten. Because she would make sure they were remembered. Life isn't always fair, and sometimes the people with the least power have to fight the hardest battles. Vivian had nothing but a small talent and a heart that refused to quit. But it was her authenticity, her devotion to her mother, and her ability to truly see people that saved her family, transformed her life, and awakened the heart of a billionaire. This story reminds us of something vital: never underestimate a small dream. Never judge someone by the clothes they wear or the job they hold. Every person you meet is carrying a battle you know nothing about. And most importantly, kindness is never wasted. Every act of goodness, no matter how small, has the power to change a life. So the next time you see someone struggling, don't look away. Stop. See them. Help if you can. Because you never know, you might be the one person who makes all the difference. And I'm so curious, where are you listening to this story from, and what time is it where you are? Please leave a comment and let me know. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. If you'd like to support this journey, you can send a small donation to help us keep these stories going. To hear more heartfelt stories like this, check out the other videos on the channel, and don't forget to subscribe to Maid's Daughter Stories, so we can share one more act of kindness with you every single day.